By the mid-1980s, the Masters of the Universe brand had become a cultural phenomenon. Parades, mall tours, TV shows, and movie deals in the line. Well, unfortunately, at the end, too much of this and not enough of this was shipped and the line died. But there was hope and a prayer to bring Masters of the Universe back, and specifically He-Man did come back in a outer space fantastic adventure called The New Adventures of He-Man, where he would fight against Skeletor and the Space Mutants and anything else that Jack O'Lester could throw at them. Of course, in addition to the animated series, there was a toy line, and it had its fans, but the line is pretty much kind of known as the black sheep of the Masters of the Universe world, and while the characters were fun, it was a little tough to recognize them. They were bulked down, and He-Man didn't seem as He-Man as he used to. Plus, outer space was a little different than the barbarian fantasy people were used to. So, unfortunately, the New Adventures of He-Man went down as a flop. But the other spin-off of Masters of the Universe, She-Ra, Princess of Power, was anything but. In fact, in many aspects, it became even more popular than its predecessor, or its parent brand, more or less. I mean, it's not exactly the Vernon Shirley off of Happy Days, but it really did hit a lot of young kids, and now kids who have turned into adults and are still fans. Now, She-Ra was originally an action figure that became a doll, that then went into a girls' line, but how she got to this, and to this, and to this is the subject of today's video. You're probably wondering why I'm talking so much about New Adventures in She-Ra. Well, it's because through the fun and awesomeness of the Masters of the Universe classic mini-comics, that starting in 2012, we used our kind of 30th anniversary money to have 3 made, and then the following years we would use our pretty much entire non-media budget to have 1 mini-comic made, because we didn't have much of a non-media budget, and because the marketing was funding these mini-comics, we used them as ways of teasing out new characters, or even new versions of characters, like here's Randor and Keldor in their sort of, early years, or Hordak in his spirit form that he used to contact Keldor. So sometimes these were able to be turned into action figures, so you can see the link between marketing, funding, and the final product. So while the mini-comics were also used for sort of pushing the brand forward and sort of setting up scenarios for potential entire, kind of seasons of a show, if you will, not every concept and variant that were put in the mini-comics got sort of, fan followings. There was versions of She-Ra as She-Ra of Arms, where she was going to take over that role. But the version that had She-Ra taking part in New Adventures, which was introduced in the mini-comics, I was so glad that so many fans actually really did embrace this, because this was a concept that we had very early on. Because the idea that He-Man went on to do New Adventures, getting a whole new cast of characters and villains. Well, where was She-Ra? What happened to She-Ra? She just kind of got left behind. Everyone always associated the brand with the two of them, I mean, especially once she was introduced. Brother and sister, although a lot of people still think they're boyfriend and girlfriend these days, but that's only with mainstream America, not us super fans. So, yes, it's like Luke and Leia. All right, so in the mini-comics, we also had New Adventures and the She-Ra and He-Man era on Eternia, and show kind of the transition and take them into outer space, and then the mini-comics brought them to their finale, and this was when we introduced New Adventures She-Ra, standing right there with New Adventures He-Man. We'd seen them leave Eternia, and we were going to see them off on their final battle. Now, there are a portion of fans out there that really do prefer their Masters of the Universe characters in their sort of quintessential look. And we did pay homage to that in the final mini-comic by having a spell cast where all of the characters sort of from their prime were brought back for one final battle. So even though we'd taken She-Ra away from her traditional look, you got one last chance to see her in this traditional, classic version. We did that deliberately because we knew as we developed new versions of characters like New Adventures She-Ra, and having her take part in He-Man's adventures just made so much sense for the brand. Now, getting her made as a toy, that's a whole other thing. And when we did announce her, there were fans that were excited that we were connecting different sort of tissues of the brand, if you will, together into one action figure. And doing things like that, it's called creating permanence. There's one thing when someone's running around on comic book pages, but when you make an actual toy, well, it exists, and it exists thanks to this guy, actually. So this is Nate Barrich, who worked with the Four Horsemen, and when we approached the Horsemen about doing New Adventure-She-Ra, he designed her. So he's also a professional artist, and also I would say a professional Masters of the Universe fan. So it's always so great to work with people that are also fans of what they're working on. And he was the one who came up with the basic look of taking what we knew about She-Ra and then what we knew about New Adventures outfits and kind of combining them, taking elements of both together. And, well, you'll see how kind of He-Man, who had that gold look, went from silver to gold. She-Ra sort of did the reverse, where she went from gold to silver. And I thought that was actually the perfect way of kind of doing that, plus with the whole, off-the-shoulder look that He-Man had. Now, you will notice there is a second She-Ra head floating out there. Now, that was not just to show what she looked like under the mask. It was intended that she would come with this head. And that goes back to the very first Princess of Power releases that we did, where fans weren't satisfied, shall we say, with the two looks we provided, actually three looks. She-Ra came with two different heads, Filmation and Classic Toy. Now, Classic Toy allowed you to take the mask and put it in sort of the tiara mode, which I guess would be this, and then also the masked mode, or sort of the, superhero mode. This was because the mask was originally intended to cover her face, but during the early testing, the toy testing, all the little girls flipped it around, thinking it was a tiara. So even though the designers intended it to be a mask, it wound up the other way. You can see this in the difference between the early mini-comics and how she wound up in later mini-comics and in Filmation. So while we wanted to allow fans to do this, it required logistically for there to be a hole in the head for the second She-Ra figure so the mask could plug in and could be reversed, either right side up or upside down, depending on, which point of view you have. Everything depends on your own point of view, right, Obi-Wan? Now, while fans were excited that they could have both upside down and right side up, again, depending on which one you think is correct, there was a lot of pushback because they wanted the option, rightly so, to display with no mask. And we didn't include that version. And a lot of fans were upset that when you pulled the mask out, it left a hole in the head. But the thing was, it wasn't intended to be displayed without the mask. So while you could put Adora's head on She-Ra, it didn't quite look right. Now, years later, we tried to do a She-Ra head where the mask was removable, and the reason we didn't do this originally is exactly what wound up happening. The hair, in order to hold the mask in place, it had to be elongated or thickened, if you will. So it doesn't look quite as right without the mask either. So you either wind up with She-Ra with a hole in the head or She-Ra with this massive amount of hair when the mask is removed. So the idea was to finally find some way to release that maskless She-Ra head. I mean, literally years of planning went into this. And when New Adventures of She-Ra came up, she was going to be the delivery system until, got cost reduced. Just could not get it in. Honestly, it's like so many years of waiting to get this head released. At least we did get the Filmation version. And while we also didn't get to every variant of She-Ra in the Classics line, and there were fans who pushed back saying, why are you doing New Adventures when you could still do Starburst She-Ra? We did plan to get to Starburst She-Ra, but the reason to kind of do New Adventures She-Ra first was, it was just a great way to combine everything and to create this, unified feeling for the brand that She-Ra and He-Man went off to new adventures together. And honestly, the figure came out great. Nate did an awesome job, and so did the Horsemen.